us hear the holy gospel. Peace be unto all.
And to thy spirit.
The reading is from the Holy Gospel according to Saint Matthew the Evangelist.
Glory to thee, O Lord. Glory to thee.
Let us attend. At that time when Jesus came to the country of the Gergesenes, two demoniacs met him coming out of the tombs, so fierce that no one could pass that way. And behold, they cried out, "What have you to do with us, O Son of God? Have you come here to torment us before the time?" Now a herd of many swine was feeding at some distance from them, and the demons begged him, "If you cast us out, send us away into the herd of swine." And he said to them, "Go." So they came out and went into the swine. And behold, the whole herd rushed down the steep bank into the sea, and perished in the waters. The herdsmen fled, and going into the city, they told everything and what had happened to the demoniacs. And behold, all the city came out to meet Jesus, and when they saw him, they begged him to leave their neighborhood. And getting into a boat, he crossed over and came to his own city.
Glory to thee, O Lord. Glory to thee.
These service books are now in some of the pews, which is a help if you want to follow along with the services. It was written really for the priest and deacon, but it's informative. There is a new book for the laity that will take a number of months to publish. You know, printing is very expensive, and so we thank our sponsor for having put these into the pews. That will be helpful. And also, I would want to encourage you to read the bulletin that provides an announcement concerning the Greatest Invitation, which is a curriculum that you may purchase online from Faith Tree Resources. The Greatest Invitation is a discussion about a lot of helps in understanding how we worship in the Orthodox Church with the Divine Liturgy as liturgia, meaning the work of the people. And so with the discussion of theologians as well as pastors and teachers and laity discussing what it means to worship in the Divine Liturgy, I'm sure you will find it enlightening. It's called The Greatest Invitation, and you can acquire this online at the Faith Tree Resources website, faithtree.org. Especially those of you who are joining us by live streaming, when your situation is quite different, from attending church. We are grateful for the live streaming of services for those of you who are homebound. But if you are in the church, you can best learn about the Divine Liturgy, its structure, and its meaning. In the name of the Father, and of the Son, and of the Holy Spirit, one God, Christ is in our midst. It would be very easy, if not tempting, in speaking on today's gospel lesson by focusing our attention upon the presence of evil in this world. However, our mission and calling and the purpose of our witness in this world is to be agents, that's right, agents of salvation, which includes reconciliation, healing, and the forgiveness of sins. In doing so, it is not easy to be caught up in the practice of retaliation or end up making wounds that exist bleed. We are reminded by St. John's Gospel, beginning with verse 16 of chapter 3, "For God so loved the world that he gave." And then in verse 17 continues, "For he did not come into the world to condemn the world, but that the world through him might be saved." And this was the theme we heard during the season of the fast of the apostles throughout the month of June that we've just completed. Remember, the themes were reconciliation, healing, and forgiveness. And so central to understanding today's gospel is not the focus upon the presence or the power of evil in this world. Instead, our attention should be focused upon our choice in acknowledging three things. First, God's presence in our life. You know, when the light shines, the darkness vanishes. You can't carry out darkness. You can't shout out darkness. You just have to turn on the light, and it's gone. That's our principle of St. John's Gospel. Number two, recognizing how God has equipped us with everything necessary to be protected from evil. And third, that is, we should know what we have that protects us. And third, to be prepared by his Spirit that equips us and empowers us with discernment, which means good judgment, against what is evil, that we should identify as wrong. In his letter to the Ephesians, St. Paul writes, "Live as children of light, for the fruit of the light consists in all goodness, righteousness, and truth." The apostle then goes on to say, "Find out what pleases the Lord." There are definitely things that must be actively pursued and done, and those things that we should not occupy our mind with and definitely avoid doing. And so the first thing to consider is, what are those things that we need to pursue? In the same passage, the apostle warns us, "Have nothing to do with fruitless deeds of darkness." Ephesians 5:8. In other words, first and most importantly, avoid things that corrupt your mind and your thinking. Avoid gossip, hearsay, rumors. It always helps when getting news to avoid secondary sources and commentaries and opinions. Know the truth from what is being said, if not, find out. and know who is directly speaking what is being said. Don't rely upon personal opinions or commentaries. This is one of the reasons why our church is very careful in her teaching and provides us with the best primary sources. There are countless interpretations, just as there are many translations. But we Orthodox steer clear away from bad translations that lead to poor and incorrect meaning, especially when we try to interpret things from the 21st century and the Western Hemisphere. We'll get it wrong. St. Paul then continues in saying, "Be very careful then how you live, not as unwise but wise, making the most of every opportunity, because the days are evil." You and I will make the most of every opportunity when we recognize that our opportunities can be found in both the good and bad. Where God is concerned, nothing happens by accident. However, even though you and I may not always know why something happens or have the answers to the circumstances, we could be doing our best to learn what God is teaching us, even through difficulties, especially when we find that things are not going our way. St. Paul calls it redeeming the time. He also uses the same phrase in writing Colossians. To redeem the time means, listen closely, finding opportunities to grow in faith, deepening our capacity to love, knowing what we must identify to confess and let go of it. Let go of it. It's endeavoring to find wisdom that enables us to truly grow and to also help others to do so. St. Paul then concludes, "Therefore don't be foolish, but understand what the Lord's will is." Ephesians 5:15. Now, if you and I are going to understand God's will, which we will never completely, we cannot allow ourselves to have a distorted or cloudy vision filled with meaningless chatter. And so putting aside those sources that contribute to a poor vision and picking up not only the Holy Bible, but praying to acquire, the Greek word is phronema, that means the mind of Christ. Thinking from God's perspective in an Orthodox context is essentially important to knowing God's will. We, more than any Christian community, have the best sources. Why? Because our sources predates all other Christian sources. And by the way, the Bible was written by the church, for the church. You can't take a personal family letter into the street and let a person, as a passerby, pick it up and understand the whole context of the relationships of your family. But many try to do it. It's called biblical criticism or extra biblical interpretations, which is outside the bounds of the context of the church. In closing, let me just say that you and I are empowered and protected by the Holy Cross against evil. It's one of the means by which we guard ourselves from the evil one. As Orthodox Christians, we should never speak of the cross in terms of superstition and just doing the sign of the cross nonchalantly as a hocus pocus sign. We fully recognize and acknowledge that evil is very real and can be very powerful. In fact, is personal and is known as the evil one. We are also very keenly aware that there are unseen spiritual realities that we must be careful about what we find enticing, what can influence our will, and God forbid, be controlling. Remember, I've said this before, God does not possess a person. The only kind of possession is demonic. There's freedom in the spirit. You and I should never become carelessly callous about evil that can lead to disregarding what we know in our right mind to be good and just. Perpetuating wrong behavior can become difficult to overcome, and when repeating what is wrong becomes normal, one falls into delusion. Remember the gospel 2 weeks ago? If the light in you is darkness, the light is darkness. It says, Jesus said, how great is that darkness? It's odd that he expressed it in that way. This is because change is always a struggle out and away from evil. We give up when we say, well, that's just the way I am. Yahara. An attitude of complacent acceptance with no vision. Or maybe a selfish inward satisfaction, which is really no peace. We heard in today's gospel the account of the demoniac in the country of the Gergesenes in Galilee. I've been there, on the east side of the Sea of Galilee. The deliverance from demonic possession resulted in fear among the herdsmen of the region. The gospel records, you heard it, quote, they fled, and going into the city, they told everything and what had happened to the demoniacs. And the city came out to meet Jesus. And listen to this. And when they saw him, they begged him to leave their neighborhood. It was clear from this account that the forces of evil had pervaded and prevailed in the lives of the people in the region. This is because delusion and deception resulting in perceiving what was bad to be the norm. The people of the area were duped. Evil had become normal. The deliverance of the demoniacs was a new normal, or a right normal, and the people were unable to accept it. That's because the demons had influenced the community. And so then, what are the ways that you and I can protect ourselves from becoming callous and, God forbid, what St. Paul calls in chapter 1 of Romans, reprobate in our lives, our way of thinking, and our behavior? What are the ways that we might guard and protect ourselves and our loved ones from all evil? It involves vigilance in spiritual preventive care. You know, you've heard of preventive care in health. Spiritually, it's no different. You need to know where your children are, what they're doing, not to always crowd their space, but to be engaged in their life and participate in their education. I shared these 4 points with you each year and remind you of them now. They're quick. They help to alert us in avoiding what are mentioned in the church's prayers of exorcisms. Yes, we exorcise the devil and demons from people, but know this, every sign of the cross is an exorcism, including when we do it for ourselves as a seal and a protection. So first, we exorcise a spirit of error, which is lies, untruths, distortions, delusion, and fraud. Second, a spirit of guile, being devious, manipulative, and cunning. Third, spirit of idolatry. We've been studying the Ten Commandments, and we've spoken about this in our study. Idolatry is anything that replaces God in your life. 4, uncleanness, physical, intellectual, and emotional. Physical, which means doing what you can to stay healthy. Intellectual means watching what you put into your minds. And emotional, we teach that we can never trust our emotions. You know, there are, psychologists say, 50 kinds of tears. When you cry, do you know why you're crying? It's probably a good time to pray. One other aspect of the church's prayers of exorcisms concerns evil of this old English word, every concupiscence. A lot of people say they want English in the church, but when we speak in English, we don't know it because we speak American. Concupiscence. In its broadest definition, concupiscence is any yearning of the soul for good. And we've been given that by God. In its strict and specific meaning, in the context of the prayers of deliverance, concupiscence is a desire of one's lower appetite that moves us contrary to reason. In other words, losing good sense. The object of one's appetite is most often the gratification of the senses. However, the object and the objective of concupiscence that pertains to what are good or positive and healthy aspiration involves our entire human nature, body, mind, and soul. That's why if you hear our prayers, it's not just for our souls, it's for our minds and our bodies. The two are linked. It consists of the subordination of reason to God. Inspired faith, or faith that is grounded in God's Spirit, places reason on the right course in order to do God's will. On the other hand, our lower appetite, when in and of itself becomes unrestrained, so as to pursue sensuous gratifications without an understanding and with a disregard for the good of our higher faculties, moves down a very slippery slope. In doing what is contrary to God's will, even to the degree of, God forbid, becoming content, thinking that what is wrong to be normal. This, my dear brothers and sisters, is what the Bible speaks about concerning how temptation becomes a sin. Temptation is not the sin until we do what is wrong. You and I are often prone or inclined to what is easier in satisfying what the fathers of the church call our passions, that move us in the wrong direction. What we have to do, because we all have passions, is to turn it, as St. John Climacus says, in the right direction. Because passions are there for a reason. So on the contrary, truth, honesty, good company, a clean and spiritually edifying environment and atmosphere, being mindful and reminded of God's presence, and positive reinforcement in the antidote and the means of preventive spiritual care from harmful and adverse behavior. Christ is in our midst.
He is never shall be.